Good morning on this beautiful sunny summer solstice, and welcome to RPRA's, our Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority's annual public meeting. I'm Jess Turquette, Manager of Communications at RPRA. I'll be your MC this morning. We're so glad you can be with us here today. There's expecting 120 people in the room and over 400 people online. So that's a lot of people. We're really excited that there was such excitement and high interest from our stakeholder community for this hybrid event this year. With me on stage is RPRA's board chair, Robert Poirier, CEO Frank Denton, and Registrar Mary Cummins. They will each share highlights from our activities and work in 2022. Following their remarks, we'll do a live Q&A period where we'll be answering both questions from the people in the room as well as our Zoom audience, and we'll be taking turns to go back and forth between the two audiences. I'll repeat these at the end again, but for those in the room during the Q&A period, if you could just raise your hand, and we have RPRA staff that will bring over wireless mics to you. For those on Zoom, you can click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen at any time during the event, type your question in and click send. There's also the upvote feature on Zoom. So if you are another person in the audience and you see a question that you want answered, if you can give it a like, that will move it up in the queue so our team knows there's interest in that question and we'll be able to get to it quicker. If there's any technical issues while you're on Zoom, feel free to send us an email at communications@rpra.ca and we'll do our best to support you. Lastly, a few items for those in the room, and maybe most of you have found this already, but washrooms are out the door to your left, or sorry, my left, your right. In case of an emergency, there are 3 emergency exits, so please go to a door marked with the exit sign. You also should see a QR code on your table. This is for event feedback. We're really curious on hearing your thoughts of how today went. So feel free to scan the QR code that's labeled annual public meeting on your table, and you can fill in the survey. For those on Zoom, we'll be launching a live poll during the meeting through Zoom towards the end of the event. I now have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Robert Poirier, our chair of our board of directors, and he will officially kick off the annual public meeting.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you. And thank you for the introduction, Jess, and good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here in person. Nice to see a room full. And of course, as everyone's used to, there's as much online as there is in person. So welcome to those that are joining us online. I'd like to start today's proceedings by acknowledging that this meeting is being held in Toronto, a traditional gathering place for many nations, including Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is also part of the area covered by Treaty 13, also known as the Toronto Purchase. And I'd like to pay my respect to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I actually had an opportunity to meet a number of chiefs over the last 3 years, and in fact was involved in a procurement that would really suggest that if you have a chance to see it at Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport, called The Gathering, and it was done in collaboration with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and David General, who is of the Six Nation, and it's a 16-foot granite piece talking about the relationship between air, land, and sea. And it's really quite incredible to witness. So it's right on the other side of the island if you go visit the airport. Ontario is unique in that its land base is covered by treaty and land purchase agreements with the original occupants of the land, namely the First Nations, who continue to care for this land and continue to shape the province. Today's land acknowledgement is particularly reflective because today is National Indigenous Peoples Day. Today is a day to honor the original peoples of this province and country, and also to acknowledge the contributions and sacrifices Indigenous peoples have made. Today is also a day in which we recognize and celebrate the cultures and contributions of the First Nations, Inuit and Métis Indigenous peoples of Canada. Let us be reminded today and every day that we all have a responsibility to be respectful to one another and protective of the environment. Thank you. It's also great to see you in person, and for those joining online, we wish you could be here. It's been 4 years since we held our last in-person annual public meeting, and I miss the energy of a room. I'm sure you would all agree. I've met a lot of people here today and a lot of sharing of energy, and in turn, we have a lot to share with you. Our annual public meeting is an important part of our commitment to transparency and accountability. It gives us the opportunity to formally present our work over the last year and to hear directly from you. Much has happened in the world of waste management since RPRA was formed 6.5 years ago. Many of these changes through implementation of the Waste Free Ontario Act, and we did so supporting business, municipality, and First Nations communities. Since our first ministerial direction in 2017, we have successfully transitioned tires in 2019, batteries in 2020, both electronic and hazardous and special products in 2021, and last year launched a new producer responsibility program for lighting. And in 10 days, the first tranche of municipalities will transition to the new Blue Box program. Furthermore, our mandate was expanded at the end of 2019 to build and operate digital reporting services for the Ontario government. I know a lot of people in the room are interested in our digital reporting. We launched the excess soil registry at the beginning of this year, following a pause as the government conducted further consultations on the new regulation to track excess soils. We also developed a new hazardous waste program registry, which was also launched this year, at the start of this year. And RPRA's delivery of both of these digital reporting services supports compliance programs run by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks. I'm immensely proud of the work RPRA has undertaken to effect and support these changes. The collaborative approach between RPRA as a regulator, industry, municipalities, and First Nations has been critical to the success of the process so far. I'm certain that the same approach will continue to achieve the minister's objectives, namely for the environment and for the Ontario economy. In looking back at 2022, I'm struck by the volume and pace of change impacting your organizations. But there are two in particular that stand out in terms of the number of Ontario businesses, municipalities, and institutions impacted. The hazardous waste program registry and the transition of the Blue Box program. We first received ministerial direction in 2020, and actually in April 2020, to create a new electronic manifesting system for the hazardous waste program. The paper-based system operated by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks was by all means outdated. You could just imagine generators sending paper copies to receivers through trucks and other things. Things got, there were no standards in terms of information. Paper got lost. At the same time, government had to store this, process it, and it was long outdated. At the same time, there wasn't a Canadian or US jurisdiction that had successfully launched an electronic manifesting system for liquid industrial and hazardous waste that we could emulate. The approach we took was collaborative and consultative with ministry staff and particularly users. Over the following 2 years, the RPRA project team convened over 100 engagements and communicated with over 37,000 stakeholders. At the board level, we set up a special oversight committee led by the chair of our Finance and Technology Committee, Ken Kowal. The committee was tasked with ensuring the project came in on budget on time, which thankfully it did. The HWP registry and mobile app was successfully launched for manifesting at the beginning of this year. That made Ontario the first North American jurisdiction to successfully launch an electronic manifesting system for liquid, industrial, and hazardous waste. 30,000 affected businesses can now file what we anticipate will be about 250,000 manifests each year. And then we move on to the transition of the Blue Box program, which is the second major initiative RPRA was focused on in 2020 that I'd like to highlight. Oh. No back button. Okay. Oh, there we go. Thank you. It is the biggest waste diversion program by cost and volume, impacts almost every home in Ontario. For so many Ontarians, the Blue Box represents their active participation in environmental sustainability. As such, ensuring the smooth transition of the Blue Box program remains a priority for RPRA. What happens in 10 days, namely on July 1st, and thereafter will be a true measure of the collective work and that the many organizations tasked with implementation. It also represents a major inflection point for the province in waste management. As you'll hear from our registrar, Mary Cummins, her compliance team has been and will remain very active in the process. For those that registered for this afternoon's learning event, I know you'll benefit from the engagement with RPRA's compliance team, ministry staff, and staff from the Competition Bureau. The Blue Box transition and the Hazardous Waste Program Registry are just two highlights from a highly productive and successful year at RPRA. Our annual report, which we published on our website 3 weeks ago in both official languages, outlines the many accomplishments of the organization in detail, and I encourage you to read it. I'm especially pleased we had the opportunity to feature some of the many Ontarians who work behind the scenes in resource recovery. I want to thank the entire RPRA team for their efforts to deliver on a very successful year. I would also like to take a moment to thank the RPRA Board of Directors for guiding the overall strategic direction of RPRA and providing effective oversight during a year of change, growth, and success. RPRA also received valuable advice from many stakeholders in industry and the municipal sector. Our collaboration has been productive and critical to our decision-making. Last year, the minister directed us to formally establish a service provider advisory council to parallel the industry one, which the ministry directed us to establish in 2021, the year earlier. I'd like to thank Carol Hochu, President and CEO of the Tire and Rubber Association of Canada, for co-chairing the Industry Advisory Council, and Paulina Leung, Chief Sustainability Officer of the Ontario Group, for co-chairing the Service Provider Advisory Council. And of course, Tom Wright, our board vice chair, also deserves much appreciation for co-chairing both councils. Over the past year, we have met often with these councils and received advice on many of RPRA's key activities, including fee setting, strategic priorities, and budgeting. I'm sure all those involved would agree that the exchange of ideas and perspectives has been vigorous, to say the least, but always respectful and considered. We have gained many insights through these discussions, and hopefully so have our partners, and both industry and municipal partners. I would also like to express my thanks to Susan Lowe, Administrator of Stewardship Ontario. She was appointed by the RPRA board to head up Stewardship Ontario 2 years ago. Her leadership has supported the smooth wind-up of the Legacy Municipal Hazardous or Special Waste Program, and now will ensure the smooth wind-up of the Legacy Blue Box Program. I'd like to conclude my remarks by thanking Minister Piccini and his staff, and the staff in the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks, who have been most generous with their time. We have all benefited enormous. There we go. The minister wouldn't like that if I. We have benefited enormously from their engagement with our work, which has ensured close alignment between RPRA's strategic priorities and the government's vision for a waste-free Ontario. At this time, I'd like to invite our CEO, Frank Denton, to the podium. Thank you very much, and thank you again for coming.
Morning. I know I need to speak into the mic for the Zoom folks. Just want to point out, you see, this is a music stand that we're using here as a podium. And it was found last night by the great folks that are helping us from St. James Cathedral. It's actually, I can read it, a University of Toronto Music Department music stand. So circular economy is not a new idea, right? Maybe it's a new name, but it's and reuse is the highest form of circular economy, I think. So it's great to see so many people here. It's been 4 years since we did this. It's always sunny when we do an annual public meeting at St. James Cathedral. I just turn my phone off. You know, I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of time on the couch kind of doom scrolling over the last few years, and just 4 years is a long way down a dangerous path towards climate change. And we need to think about that. At RPRA, I think we like to think that I've also read glimmers of hope, right? You know, new plastics, you know, fewer plastics, new forms of energy, new regulations, because this isn't going to happen without regulation. So I call those glimmers of hope. And I like to think that at RPRA, working collectively with you people and your companies and many others, we are one of those glimmers of hope, maybe making a small change for the better as humanity responds to the climate crisis. But today, I want to talk about RPRA, focusing on 2022, a little bit about 2023. We want to talk about what we've done to support the ministers and the government's objectives, economic objectives and environmental objectives. 2022 saw important progress in our collective adaptation to the new producer responsibility framework, and a lot of adaptation to these two new digital reporting services that we're delivering on behalf of the ministries to support their compliance programs. It's a challenging year, challenging for businesses, service providers, producers, for pros. Hundreds of pages of regulation, probably thousands of individual obligations that people need to find a way to navigate through while they are managing their businesses. For municipalities, managing change in how waste is recovered, how waste is managed, and managing the expectations of something like 5 million households in Ontario that use our Blue Box program. Also for First Nations communities who have an opportunity, particularly with the Blue Box, to have better waste management systems on within their communities. At RPRA, our focus has been, was, and still is interpreting the laws made by government, supporting our registrants in understanding and complying with those new laws, enforcing the laws where necessary, and my colleague Mary will talk about that in a few minutes, providing public information to enable everybody, the businesses affected, the people affected, and the governments, both municipal and provincial, to see the progress on this long journey to a circular economy. We strengthened our operations last year in a number of ways. We know we're expected to be effective, to be cost effective and efficient and transparent in what we're doing with the money that producers provide us to deliver our services. In 2022, we worked with our advisory councils to determine our strategic priorities for the coming years. And there's the 4 strategic priorities that are set out in our last year's business plan for starting in 2023. They're really a continuation of the work we're already doing, but we framed it in a different way. So priority 1 is providing registrants with accessible and easy to use registry services that meet their needs and the requirements of the regulations. Each one is built around a specific regulation, one of those regulations with hundreds of obligations in it. We completed the final registry projects, as Robert mentioned, for hazardous and special products and Blue Box and the hazardous waste program. All of those were completed in 2022, all went live on time. They worked the way we wanted them to, and they came in on budget. So we were pleased. I was personally very relieved when we saw that. Priority 2 is delivering an effective compliance program to achieve resource recovery and waste reduction outcomes for the province, for all of us. And Mary's going to speak about that in a few minutes. Priority 3 is to provide Ontario with reliable and useful resource recovery information. Ontario is the first jurisdiction in Canada with a regulator that's empowered to require information to be provided and to ensure that that information is accurate. Priority 4 is building an accountable, transparent, sustainable organization that achieves value for money. We introduced a number of measures to make our operations more transparent and more effective and efficient. So Robert highlighted key areas of expansion of our operations in 2022. We prepared to transition the Blue Box program, including launch of that portal, and that transition happens on July 1st. I asked Mary, are we in cruise control now for July the 1st, or is this what's going to happen? She may talk about that. We launched the hazardous and special products registry portal. We launched the new compliance program for lighting using a portal that we developed in 2021. We launched a digital reporting services for the hazardous waste program, industrial hazardous waste, not to be confused with household special waste, hazardous waste called sometimes. Relaunching the excess soil service, and all of that you can read about in our annual report and much more if you visit our website. I'm sure most of you have. I would like to introduce my executive leadership team in alphabetical order. We have a number of new faces. Mary Cummins began as registrar in early 2022. Noah Gitterman, General Counsel, Chief of Strategic Initiatives. Lorella Hayes, our Chief Financial and Administrative Officer. Lisa Innes. Hi, Lisa. Chief Information Officer, and Wilson Lee, our Programs and Public Affairs, who led the team that made all this happen today. We have a very diverse and talented team. We've done a lot of hiring. I think we started as 12 when we were formed, and now we're well over 60, and we're going to level out somewhere around a little bit over 81 in the near future. They're diverse professionally, and they're diverse in their personal backgrounds. We speak 23 languages at RPRA. We can't offer them all to our stakeholders, but that's I'm proud of that. And we our birthplaces span 5 continents. Nobody from Australia, and I don't know about Antarctica. I don't count Antarctica. Last year, our staff increased by, now I think we're going to get into some numbers, which you'll be able to read faster than I can talk about them. We increased our staff by 14 from about 54 to 68, largest increase in staff since we were first established at the end of 2016. Most of that growth occurred on the front lines and the compliance and registry teams and the communications team that support the service delivery that we do. The number of registrants we support has grown substantially, which is part of the reason our staff grew. We had something like 20,000 registrants that we were serving last year. And that felt like a lot. So that was a lot of change, a lot of evolution. It kept us on a steep learning curve. When you're doing things for the first time, we talk about this at work. Hey, this is something we're doing for the first time, right? Yeah, this is the first time we've ever done this. So you're on a learning curve. You don't get everything right the first time. And we heard from lots of people that we didn't get things right, and we listened, and we did some course correction. I'll give you an example of something we didn't quite foresee. In 2022, we were in the first year of implementation of 5 of our current 8 programs that we're delivering. Never been done before. We underestimated the needs of the businesses that are relying on us to help them understand what they need to do, how they can comply, how they can do that efficiently. We had a lot of people on the phones, a lot of emails, a lot of people asking for help from RPRA's team. So we course corrected, increased our frontline resources to meet those needs. It did not go unnoticed that put our 2023 budget significantly above what we forecast for 2023 in a long time before that. Our 2023 business plan projects basically a flat budget for 2024 and 2025. I know producers in particular are interested to hear that. So assuming no new direction from the minister, that's how we're tracking now as we enter into our business planning process for 2024. So more numbers. Our revenues last year were 14.2 million compared to 11.8 in 2021. This increase reflects RPRA's higher operating costs last year as the number of our producer responsibility programs increased. 85% or $12.1 million of our revenues came from fees charged to registrants in tires, electronics, batteries, lighting, HSP, and the Blue Box program. The remainder of our revenues, 2.1, came from fees charged to the legacy industry funding organization, industry stewardship organization. They're not wound up yet. There's a long tail on the wind up of those organizations. They're still sitting on some surplus money that's caught up in some kind of a tax issue that I don't fully understand. But we still have oversight responsibility for those. This year, revenues will also are also coming from lighting producers and obligated users of the hazardous waste and excess soils. On the expense side, our overall expenses increased 26% from 11.7 million in 21 to 14.7 million last year, again, due to the expanded mandate. Key areas of growth in expenses include increased salary and benefit costs due to the growth of staff, registry expenses for increased maintenance costs, professional fees for the development of registry procedures and organization reviews, amortization expenses for registry systems that have come online, and loan interest to finance registry system development. And I forgot to put in my notes, but I'll take this opportunity, reminds me, we had great support from our vendors, PwC. I saw a couple of PwC folks here today, and Slalom. Great partnership with our vendors and with the ministry, particularly on hazardous waste and excess soils, as well as with the many people who are using this. So one of the cost drivers in our operations is our registry system. As you probably know, our legislation requires us to build a registry and an operator registry portal for each program to register and receive reports from obligated parties. And each one has to be uniquely designed. There are commonalities across the regulations, but each one has very specific requirements, and that all has to be designed for as we build each portal to meet the registry. Our registry costs are up there on the screen, totaling $25.3 million, 6.9 for foundational elements that are spread across all the programs, 2.1 for tires, 1.3 for a combined electronics, battery, and lighting project, 2.6 for hazardous and special products, 1.4 for the blue box, an even million plus change for excess soil, and $9.9 million for the hazardous waste program registry, as well as the mobile app that we developed to make that work on the ground. And those costs are split roughly 50-50 between the producer responsibility programs and the digital reporting services. Have it here in my notes. I think I've already said this. I never get tired of saying those projects came in on time, on budget, and they worked as intended. The user feedback was broadly positive. The vast majority of users have rated those systems as user-friendly. As somebody who rapidly gets very impatient if something doesn't work exactly as my intuition expects it to, I think that's great. We know they need work. They can be challenging. We'll continue to enhance. We're always interested in how RPRA is perceived. Anybody who's spoken to me knows I'm always asking, how are we doing and what are people saying about us? How can we better serve the registrants? This past years and most past years, we did a broad survey of our registrants using an independent firm. So we understand what we're doing well, where we can improve. We're making changes. We saw these results, and we are working on changes to try to improve our numbers. What gets measured gets done. Our highest scores were in registrants' perception of RPRA fulfilling its mandate, positive interactions with their frontline staff. Thank you, frontline staff. I think they're critical to our reputation, and they've got a lot on their plates every day. Usability of our registry system and the effectiveness of our communications. So we established 3 KPIs. I'm sure you've already read them by now, and all 3 are telling us that we're doing okay, but we want to do better. So our performance measures, they measure perceptions about reputation, mandate fulfillment, and support of compliance. Our registry services KPI will track interactions, including time and effort. Education awareness KPI to track perceptions about our, I didn't turn this thing off. I can't believe it. Sorry about that. It was supposed to be a prop. You knew that, right? And our education awareness KPI tracks perceptions about our communications. Our goal continues to be better service delivery, fairness in our operations, high compliance rates, and enhanced transparency and accountability. And that's also on our website. So I'll talk a couple of minutes about public reporting. It's a core function of RPRA. You saw it's one of our strategic priorities. We called it out starting in our this year's business plan. Producers want to see the results of all the effort they're putting into and their collective efforts in driving better performance outcomes. Municipalities want to know how much material is being kept out of landfill, and they need data on collection networks to ensure accessibility. The public needs to understand where their waste is going, and government needs it for evidence-based policy. I doubt that these regulations are cast in stone forevermore. They need to understand what's happening, the impacts, the outcomes that are being achieved, so they can make improvements over time. So we made substantial progress in 22 on this priority. We did consultation. We heard a lot. I think it was one of our most attended consultations, if I'm right. We heard strong interest in more and better public reporting on how these producer responsibility programs are performing. We also heard that people want to see public reporting on our own compliance efforts, our compliance activities. And so we've responded to both of those. We've largely reflected what we heard, and that's a work in progress. You're going to see over time, the website will have more data, easier to understand, more accessible. Next, I'd like to talk about our work with the Indigenous communities in Ontario, which I'm very, very happy about. These communities are an important and unique group of partners, and they're facing an important opportunity to have better waste management, resource recovery systems in those communities. We sought meaningful and respectful engagement, reflecting First Nation status as an order of government. We've begun our outreach by meeting with community leaders in their communities. We're participating in First Nations conferences so we can learn how best to engage. We believe these efforts will increase awareness of RPRA, that's our goal, and build trust in Ontario's resource recovery and waste management systems so they can take best advantage of this opportunity to improve waste management in their communities. So almost done. I'm going to close with just a few words of gratitude, really for the advice and support of many, many people through 2022. We heard from so many people outside RPRA, what they like, more about what they don't like. If they like it, they tend to just keep it to themselves. But a lot of positive support and a lot of very pointed advice on what we can be doing differently. We did a lot of consulting on many different issues. I learned the term consultation fatigue a couple of years ago. It's not just RPRA consulting, government consults, other jurisdictions are consulting. We tried our best to make those consultations accessible and meaningful, and we listened to everything, didn't agree with everything, but we consulted on our business plan, on our fees, on our registry procedures, public reporting. We know this put pressure on you to understand the issues and the questions we were raising. Our board became more involved directly with stakeholders in 2022, a number of meetings with our advisory councils so they could speak directly to the board members. And we appreciate that feedback. I want to thank, as Robert did, the minister and his staff for taking the time to understand who we are, what we're trying to do, and how we are supporting the minister's objectives. I want to thank the ministry staff who are also generous with their time, supporting our relationship with the government, helping us navigate through that system, and engaging us often on changes that were going to impact how we were delivering, and asking us, how will this work on the ground if we make this change? I want to thank the board we have a great board, skills-based board. They ask great questions, and they are doing a very strong job of strategic guidance and diligent oversight. I think I'm closing with thanking the RPRA team, everybody on the RPRA team. It's a very collaborative culture. I think everybody feels positive about what we're trying to do, and looks forward to the challenges ahead. We are privileged to support the organizations we serve. I truly feel that way as we travel down this pathway to an environment and a climate that will be better than it otherwise would be. I'd now like to introduce Mary Cummins, our registrar, and she's going to talk about the work she's doing with the compliance team. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, so they said we had to talk very closely to this so the folks in Zoom could hear. So I apologize if I seem a little over preoccupied with making sure that happens. So first, something I want to just acknowledge that I'm seeing this morning in this room. I was standing at the entrance with some folks that I've worked in the extended producer responsibility framework world with me for quite a long time. And we're looking around this room and we're seeing many faces that are new. It's not that they're new to the extended producer responsibility framework, it's that they're new to RPRA, because RPRA's mandate has changed. We now offer digital reporting services on behalf of the ministry to support hazardous waste program and excess soils. So there is a crossover in terms of who these stakeholders are and who our registrants are. So I hope all of you get a chance to talk to each other and learn a little bit more about how RPRA has expanded and grown and how we affect you. One thing I want to do though, and just take a moment, which I would normally not do at an RPRA event, but now I think it might be worthwhile, is what is EPR? Just high level, because I think there's a lot of folks in the room who understand and engage with RPRA on our digital reporting services and are sitting here saying compliance, that's not something that impacts them. So just so that we can level set, so everyone can understand what I'm going to talk about a little bit more, we have our digital reporting services for hazardous waste program and excess soils. Those are not enforced by RPRA. Those are enforced by the ministry. We are here to support the ministry and the registrants, 20,000 of them, coming in, providing us information so that they are able to comply with those regulations. On the other side, we have extended producer responsibility. You're going to note there's probably a lot of companies here who interact with RPRA. You've got a staff member who interacts with RPRA solely for digital reporting. And then you've got a staff member who probably knows what EPR is, but it's probably not the same person in all cases. Extended producer responsibility is the principle that producers are accountable financially for their products and their packaging at end of life. I'm not going to lie to you, there's about 15 different definitions of extended producer responsibility. So that's the one I came up with just quickly here. You can probably Google it and find many others. But just at a high level, that is what EPR is. That is RPRA as a regulator. That is what RPRA enforces. That is what we're looking at compliance with. So I just wanted to do that level set. If you're having difficulty understanding what it is, my 10-year-old nephew just likes to say we're the recycling police. So that kind of helps. So think of us that way as well. If you're not familiar with us, you're only interacting with us, digital reporting services, this will at least help you understand some of the context of what I'm going to talk to you about. On that note, though, as registrar, I am accountable for both ends of that service. So my team is accountable for the compliance and enforcement under the EPR frameworks, and my team is accountable for service delivery to digital reporting services. So I am your person, no matter which one of those buckets you fall into or whether you fall into both. So I just wanted to take a moment and level set that for everyone. So Frank and Robert covered financials, our board, a lot of our accomplishments. I want to talk to you about those two things, our compliance and enforcement function and our service delivery function. And that's what my remarks are going to focus on. So first, the EPR side a little bit. As Frank and Robert both spoke about there, we're in the middle of a major change in Ontario. In just 10 days' time, Ontario's iconic Blue Box program is about to transition as part of this change. For me, this change for EPR means the following: a level playing field for businesses through a fully empowered regulator with a compliance toolkit to enforce producer requirements, a competitive market for resource recovery services, which gives producer choice in how they achieve the requirements in their EPR regulations, and accurate resource recovery data that has been verified and independently audited using a common set of definitions and standards established by RPRA. This is way too low. Just give me a sec. I don't think it moves. It's probably because it's not new. Ah, there we go. That's a little bit better. So for 6.5 years, RPRA has worked to introduce this new extended producer responsibility framework that embodies all of that change. So far, we have tires, batteries, electronics, hazardous materials, not to be confused with the digital reporting services program, also with the word hazardous in it. That's just a fun present we all got, that there are two programs we oversee, both with the same word, and lighting. And as I said, the transition for the Blue Box program is about to begin. It is a monumental feat that we are on for the Blue Box program. And I want to say, no matter how big, no matter how small your involvement in this transition, whether it was for the hazardous program, whether it's for paints, oil filters, solvents, whether it was for lighting or batteries, or whether you've been involved in the transition for Blue Box, we all should be proud of what we're accomplishing together. So just take a moment and recognize this is a huge change, and we should be proud of that. So as I alluded, and as many of the maybe digital reporting services folks aren't aware, starting on July 1st, just 10 days from now, and then rolling out over the next 3 years, Ontario communities are going to stop having a program for Blue Box run by their municipality. And instead, it's going to be a program run by the producers being the packaging and material that you're putting in your blue bin. So when you look at that product and you see that brand name, that's who now runs your blue bin program. In theory, you should notice no change, not on July 1st. And well, I will admit there's going to be some challenges that we need to work out over the next 3 years. I believe this journey is well in hand. It will be a success. And once we complete this transition, Ontario will have moved into a fully functional extended producer responsibility model for all of those materials, achieving all of those objectives I mentioned at the beginning. But I'm actually not here to talk about what the future holds or what 2023 holds. I'm supposed to only talk about what 2022 and what we did there. So let's just spend some time chatting about that. So last fall, producer responsibility for lighting began with lighting producers having to register and report to RPRA. They report their supply data to RPRA producers under the Extended Producer Responsibility Framework. The lighting producers reported this supply data for us or to us so that come January 1st of 2023, RPRA was able to tell them what their obligations would be to have a collection and management system set up in place, making them fully financially accountable for the lighting products. As part of the registration and reporting campaign in the fall, the compliance team engaged with over 90% of the identified lighting producers. That's one-on-one engagement, not just emails being sent out, one-on-one conversations, back and forth emails. The other 10% would have received our regular communications, our mass communications, all of that, but 90% of them received one-on-one engagement. That engagement ensured that 39 out of the 40 identified high priority lighting producers were registered by the end of the year. They knew what their obligations were come January 1st. And by the end of the year, 60 lighting producers had registered and reported to RPRA. 2022 was also the first full year of operations for HSP. HSP, again, not to be confused with Hazardous Waste Program, Hazardous Special Products. And by the end of the year, the team had identified 430 potential free riders under that program. For electronics and batteries, 2022 was the second full year under the new producer responsibility framework. And by the end of the year, conveniently, same number as HSP, this wasn't a mistake, 430 potential free riders for electronics and 137 potential free riders for batteries were identified. 2022 was also the fourth year of operations for our most mature EPR program. And by the end of the year, the team had identified 128 potential free riders in the tires program. So let me summarize what that means a little bit. Our efforts last year identified over 1,000 potential free riders. These are companies that were not registered with the legacy programs. These are net new companies. We had the producers registered under the legacy programs for industry funding organizations. Only some of you will understand what that means, but it's important. These are net new companies who have obligations in Ontario. Let me footnote that, may have obligations in Ontario. We're going to determine systematically and work with those 1,000 companies to figure out whether or not they do have obligations. They might be out of compliance, but if they are out of compliance, they will be brought into compliance. As I said, we're rolling out the compliance plan to ensure whether or not they have obligations. But this process of working directly with a company who has no idea that they've been out of compliance potentially, has no idea what extended producer responsibility is, has no idea whether they have obligations or how to comply, is complex. It's going to take us time. We will work with all of them, like we worked with all of you, to help you figure out what your obligations are and to help you figure out what you are required to report. We believe fundamentally the companies want to comply with the law. They just need to understand it. So this process will take time. For those of you who are interested in our extended producer responsibility compliance framework, we're going to talk about this a little bit more this afternoon. We're going to talk about our approach, and we're going to talk about the tools we have to ensure compliance and to ensure a level playing field, even historically with these companies. But I just want to recognize that I'm approaching this from a perspective of they just need our help. There may be 2% that might be hiding, but for the most part, they just need help. And we will be here to help. And we will be here to enforce the law if necessary against the 2%. However, I also want to note that was only one portion of our efforts in 2022. There are 3 types of free riders for RPRA. The first one we've just spoken about, 1,000 potential free riders who have failed to register and report. We will work with them. The second are producers who underreport their supply data. This can be knowingly or likely unknowingly. It's complex sometimes figuring out, especially if you have thousands of SKUs that potentially are obligated under these regulations, what to report, what not to report, whether or not you have the right guidance from RPRA. Supply data is so important. Supply data is what determines a producer's legal obligations under these regulations. A producer making an error in their report means that that producer is obligated for less than their fair share. That is not a level playing field. That is an unknowing free rider. We need to work with them to bring them into compliance too, to level the playing field. However, sometimes we also find the reverse can happen, and they've actually reported more than their fair share. So this work we do in the end can end up saving producers money, because what they report to us, if it is overinflated, if they've made those errors and they're out there trying to achieve obligations based on that, when they're actually smaller than what they've reported, they're going to be paying more. This work is fundamental. This second type of free rider is why last year the team verified all high priority producer accounts in tires, batteries, and electronics. This verification process levels the playing field, and it catches that over-reporting, which saves producers money. Not just in their fees, like I said, that they pay to RPRA, but to the fees they pay to the pros. But this isn't just important supply data for verifying and ensuring a level playing field and making sure producers aren't paying more than their fair share. You heard Frank talk a little bit about our public reporting process. Supply data is actually the foundation. It is the starting point to tracking Ontario's circular economy success. It must be verified. And the last type, I told you there were 3 types of free riders. The producer who is registered, who is reporting correctly, but failing to comply with resource recovery management requirements. Primarily those being that accountability component to either set up a collection network, like the Blue Box program servicing over 5 million households, or set up a management network to make sure what was actually collected from that network is recovered. Here, think about producers who sign up, register, report correctly, but don't go out and get a producer responsibility organization and join one of those networks. Or think about a producer responsibility organization who doesn't have a compliant network on behalf of their producers. They are also free riding. We need to make sure it's a level playing field and that those systems are compliant. This last type of free rider is why last year you saw our efforts focus on ensuring that the tires and the batteries collection systems were compliant. But we can't forget level playing field isn't just about the producers. Under the EPR framework, RPRA also regulates service providers. This is where there's a lot of crossover between digital reporting services for HWP and EPR. Service providers are those who, on behalf of producers, are recovering or they're hauling and transporting waste, which is really resource. They're taking it to a processing facility and they're recovering it into a recovered resource. They play a key role in extended producer responsibility. And they also have obligations under these regulations. So last year, we began collecting more than just resource recovery data from these haulers and these resource recovery processors. Last year, service providers and RPRA began working on developing procedures to measure the efficiency of their facilities. These procedures are based on a key principle. All service providers must measure their efficiency the same way and must adhere to the efficiency requirements in the regulations. This is the case in batteries, electronics, and some of those hazardous special products materials, so paints or oil filters. And enforcing these requirements is equally important work RPRA does to ensure a level playing field for our service providers. And also important for ensuring our producers are able to send their products to service providers who meet the requirements in the regulation for efficiency rates. So I think you're sensing there's a lot here. And in 2022, service providers and producers all needed RPRA's help. There were over 45,000 calls and emails, both inbound and outbound, with producers and service providers. The team did an absolutely great job responding to the support calls for our regulated entities. They used it, they did this prioritization of responses using something called a risk-based compliance framework. Again, for those sticking around in the afternoon, we're going to dive more into what that is. But what it means at a fundamental level is you may receive longer than normal wait times to get an answer to one of your questions if it's not deemed priority in that moment by an officer who's received the question. So if you received a response time that was really very quick, maybe a day, 2-day turnover, you were a high priority question. Longer, you might not have needed an answer in order to comply to something required today. However, we knew last year in 2022, this was going to change. Our service delivery model was fundamentally about to get churned over. We weren't just responding using a risk-based compliance framework. We weren't just interacting with our registrants using that foundation. We knew we needed a new service delivery model, and we needed it soon. So we had about 20,000 registrants coming to our door under the digital reporting services. This is where now we link over with that. So a service delivery model is just a series of processes for high volume intake. It allows the team to be able to triage, to know how to respond, what to do, how to interact with other departments at RPRA as all of these inquiries are coming in. It allows them to interact, whether you're an EPR registrant or whether you're a digital reporting services registrant. We needed it, and we needed it right away because we knew the volumes were going to increase. And we were right. In January of 2023, that first month, we received more calls than in the entirety of 2022. We planned, and we planned at a perfect time. The service delivery model is used with all of our registrants, EPR programs, and digital reporting services. But it was built on two key compliance principles. 1, communications, and 2, collaboration. This approach works. We've proven it works in the EPR programs because we do have a high degree of compliance. Despite the 1,000 potential free riders, we are running successful compliance programs because of all of our registrants. So how do we do this? We start with communications, and we communicate with the intent to educate. We're coming from a point of assuming that you don't understand as a business in order how to comply. And that's okay. We're here to help you. And we're coming at it with the intent of saying, You will want to comply once you understand. And we collaborate. We collaborate and communicate with the goal of compliance, conveniently 3 C's. We do this with the producer community, industry associations, many of whom are here today, municipalities, and service providers. We wouldn't be able to sustain the compliance programs we run without communication and collaboration. And I'm incredibly grateful for the collaboration we have with all of our stakeholders. I'm looking forward to developing this service delivery model to service both our digital reporting programs and our EPR programs more efficiently throughout the years. This model will be refined and it will be improved. On the note of what I'm looking forward to, I want to highlight some other compliance initiatives that we'll be focusing on the coming years. First is our work on registry procedures. As I said, those are really important procedures. They help producers figure out how to verify their supply data. We've already talked about why supply data is so very important. Could be a procedure we develop and say, here's how you determine how much you supply into Ontario when you're a company that supplies nationally. It helps producers determine what to report and on what not to report. But I want to send out a message so that everyone hears this. My team knows this, and I want to make sure every producer knows this. They are under direction to develop these procedures with 2 goals in mind: harmonization and burden reduction. We are not verifying for verifying's sake, and we will make it for a producer who has verification requirements across Canada as efficient as we can with our other jurisdictions. Another example of a major blue box, or another example of a major registry procedure we're developing, is blue box performance procedures. This procedure is going to tell pros and service providers how RPRA requires performance to be tracked so it can then be audited and then count towards a producer's target. We're going to be working with service providers and the pros in blue box on this in the coming months to get it started. As I've said, these registry procedures are core so that we have confidence in the data so that we're able to meet those public reporting outcomes Frank spoke about. So wrapping up, 2002 was my first year as registrar, as Frank had noted earlier. And I have been supported in this role by many people. But the first acknowledgement I want to give is to the great team at RPRA. All of you play a really big role in our success. Earlier, you heard Frank talk about our headcount, our FTEs, how many people we have. You also heard him say we have 20,000 registrants now. I don't know that you're able to do this math, but we only have 20 frontline officers. That's 1 officer for 1,000 of you. That is an effective and efficient system. Our service delivery model refinements this year will allow us to get back to you even faster, but that is impressive. 1 frontline officer for every 1,000 of you. Think about what they're doing. Amazing job. Think about everything they help with. Password resets, submitting an HWP manifest, navigating the complexity of figuring out whether those potential free riders are actually producers. But I'm indebted to everyone, all of the staff at RPRA, compliance support officers, accounts receivable officers, IT support, communication, our inspectors, audit officers, and of course, my compliance management team. This afternoon, we're going to learn about how we work together under the EPR framework so you can understand better. I'd also like to thank my executive colleagues and my executive team, most of whom are here today, the RPRA Board of Directors and my board chair, as well as our partners at the ministry and the minister's office. Their support has been invaluable and deeply appreciated as we're navigating through this massive change. Lastly, I want to thank all of you, our registrants and our stakeholders. Collaboration and communication. You are proving this works as a model for compliance. I know that we're all committed to upholding the laws of the province, and that we all are in this together, whether it's the digital reporting services or whether it's EPR, a cleaner environment and a stronger economy. So on that note, I'm going to thank all of you, and I think we have time for questions now. And I apologize, I hit this so much. I was trying to project. They said to project. I was trying to project.
Thank you, Robert, Frank, and Mary. So yes, question and answer time. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll be answering questions from both the online audience as well as in person. So for those on Zoom, again, click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and then type your question in and click send. You can upvote and like other people's questions as well. For those in the room, raise your hand for any questions. We do have 2 RPRA staff. So if Monica and Lindy could give waves on either side. Hello, Monica and Lindy. They'll be the mic runners. So we'll try to do as best as possible if there's a lot of people, and I'll help moderate that. So just raise your hand and we'll come find you. We will do our best to answer all of our questions. We have until around 12. We're expecting a lot of questions to be compliance and registry delivery and support related. So a lot of questions for Mary, like we've seen in previous years, which is great. If you do have a really specific question to your situation or your business needs, it's likely best suited to be handled with some of our compliance officers. So especially for those on Zoom, we'll likely follow up with you directly after the meeting. So just keep that in mind for how we're kind of deciding what questions we're able to get to today. So with that, I'm going to do a bit of a switcheroo and sit down. So if Cam can help me. All right. Any questions in the room? Okay, I have the first one here.
Hi, Doug Cathcart, OPG. Mary, this is a question for you. Maybe 2 parts, just to help me understand a little more about, you identified lighting producers engaged 90%, and you spoke about high priority lighting. First question would be, what does that mean, high priority lighting?
Absolutely. So high priority is actually a term we use in each producer bucket. High priority generally means that they represent at least 80% of the supply data. We determine that list using help by lighting industry associations. So because lighting was our first program where we couldn't rely on IFO data, the legacy program. So for instance, I can look and see who 80% of the tonnage supplied into Ontario is for paint under the legacy programs, pick them and say, those are my high priority. For lighting, we worked with the industry associations and said, who are the big guys? And there was a list of 40 created that were considered high priority.
Thanks, Barry. And you identified 39 of the 40 registered?
39 out of that 40 identified, registered, and reported on time.
So the one remaining then, is that considered a non-compliance?
Potentially. It depends on the facts of that one case. I'm actually not familiar with it off the top of my head. They may have complied by the end of the year. They just didn't comply by the reporting deadline.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Doug. Any other questions in the room? Yeah.
Sorry, for the people online, I think you just need to.
Yeah, as a producer, I could say that this is another level of bureaucracy I have to comply with, because you're a quasi, not an NGO, not an official government agency, but with WSIB and Ministry of the Environment, say Ministry of Transportation, CRA, all that, the cost of compliance is for a small producer of say wood batteries, tires, whatever. What's that cost of compliance going to be now?
So those programs have been complying for quite some time now. You'd have to ask them what their cost to comply is. We don't actually get involved with that component. So when a tire producer, for instance, comes and registers and reports their supply data to RPRA, RPRA tells them what their obligations are. It's a private marketplace from there on in. So they go out and they determine how they're going to meet those obligations. Usually involves them contracting with a firm to help them. They're called producer responsibility organizations. How much those firms charge them, we have over 30 of them for all of the programs, is between them and the firm.
So then I'm not sending payments to you like WSIB then?
No, not
You
like
just
that.
Just have to contract with private producers. The other thing is here in Ontario, we're being held to a much higher standard than say third world countries and many other jurisdictions where they can just pollute, continue on polluting like yesteryear, like decades ago. What about other countries, other jurisdictions, third world countries, that sort of thing where, pollution,
Just hold the mic.
okay, what about other, countries, third world countries and other jurisdictions where they, they can continue polluting, and there's no producer responsibility, that sort of thing. That's the trouble, even with climate change where, China, Russia, India, Brazil didn't sign on to the Paris Accords, that sort of thing.
So I can really only speak to Ontario and Canada and the good work we're doing here.
Yeah.
But I would also note that India has programs for EPR coming out. There are a lot of EPR programs is something that is spreading across the globe in all areas. Some of the places you just mentioned, they may not have EPR programs, but they have something called informal programs, where there is actually a robust market to recover a lot of these materials. So it's going to happen on a global level in terms of what needs to happen. May not be happening quickly, but again, I can really only focus on what Ontario is doing because that's where my authority is. I don't know if Frank, Robert, you wanted to add something about that because I know that both of you also have.
No. Nothing to add. It is growing though. The Ontario model is based on something that was developed in Europe decades
Yes.
ago. It's coming to Canada. Ontario is moving to a next generation of producer responsibility. And, my feed, my emails, I see things popping up in different states in the US and internationally. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is a great website, a great international organization that tracks a lot of the
MacArthur.
efforts. Yeah, Ellen MacArthur Foundation tracks a lot of the efforts by producers, governments, and others in bringing forward reforms to promote a circular economy.
See, you did have something to add.
Yeah.
I'd also add OECD is a great place to go to for what's happening in other jurisdictions around EPR and resource recovery in the circular economy, if you're interested in finding out more.
Thanks. No longer will we be shipping plastic waste to the third world in, vast quantities or no electronic waste or all that, and it's just being dumped into harbors or dumped.
You mean from Ontario?
Yeah, or other Western countries, yeah.
I can only comment to Ontario. Those registry procedures I told you about
Yeah,
track
yeah.
all of the waste. So I don't think it would be fair to say electronics or blue box materials are being dumped in other countries, at least from Ontario.
Yeah.
Again, I can only speak to Ontario.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to note. It's also important to note that as it relates to our fees, the government does understand the impact to small business, and there are exceptions in legislation.
I have one more thing to add. The cost of the regulation is very substantial. Cost of RPRA, a tiny portion of that, but one of our core goals, which is expected of us by the minister, is to minimize the burden on businesses. Regulations bring burden. That's the way it is. We live in a highly regulated society and we take the benefit of that. But all the work that Mary talked about is intended to support businesses in efficiently meeting their compliance obligations at lowest cost.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch to some online questions. So the first one here, I'll start with Mary. Best efforts, and this is a term that is used in our compliance programs, seems intentionally vague under the regulations. Some programs are undergoing best efforts to set up the program. How will RPRA interpret best efforts?
So we actually have a compliance bulletin on our website. It's been there since 2020 that speaks to best efforts and how the registrar approaches it. It is a legally enforceable standard. It is the concept that you took all reasonable steps and efforts as determined by the registrar in order to comply. So there is something more information on our website for this. It's been there for a few years, but on an overall basis, there's no checklist. You can't, if you're a producer under best effort requirements, you can't say, I do these 6 things by the registrar and I'm good. It all depends on what is going on what's happening, what's making it difficult to be able to comply. There's a lot in consideration to best efforts. There's no one size fit all answer, but we have given some guidance. If you want to know individually or collectively whether or not you're achieving best efforts, we can have those one-on-one conversations, because it is very much so. It depends on the facts of the circumstance.
Thanks, Mary. Another question here for Mary. What proportion of producers in the compliance programs are based in provinces other than Ontario?
Oh, I don't know. I think if someone from my team is here, we might be able to get that number for you. But even that might not be accurate, because it's going to tell us where their head office is registered. It doesn't mean that they're not an Ontario-based producer as well. And I'm not sure if the question is referring to outside of Ontario as in Canada or outside of Canada. We do have producers who are registered outside of Canada, outside of Ontario. The law requires that if you are directly marketing to Ontario, some of the regulations require this. If you are directly marketing to Ontario consumers, but you don't have any residency in Canada, you are still actually obligated. So we do have registrants around the world.
I don't know if this relates to the question, Mary, but you and I have often talked about that many of the producers that we regulate operate in multiple jurisdictions, and they frequently bring that to your attention. I've got to follow 10 different standards. Why can't Ontario do like everybody else? Maybe talk for a moment about what you do to optimize harmonization within your discretion.
Absolutely. It's something larger companies, so those that operate either nationally or globally, more nationally, I think, come to RPRA and say, there are some areas in our control, those registry procedures I mentioned about verification and tracking and how to audit. I am in regular contact with all of the jurisdictions in Canada, so that I'm able to find out what they're doing, how they're doing it. And we're working, we have a manager here at RPRA on the compliance team whose mandate is to look at harmonization. How can we take those registry procedures and actually attempt to harmonize them to reduce that burden for all of the producers? It's a process. We're on a journey. We're in the middle of a big transition, but that is the end goal, is some of that harmonization to reduce the burden. I think at a global level, we don't hear that nearly as much. A lot of these global companies, it really depends on where their office is located and what their involvement in EPR programs are. But definitely we're hearing it across Canada. And one thing Frank mentioned there that producers should be watching, the US now has 80 EPR programs and it's growing. 3 blue box EPR programs just passed in the last few months. So it's going to keep coming and it's going to keep growing. And Ontario, our regulator here, is going to do everything we can to try to minimize that and still achieve the province's policy objectives.
Thanks, Mary. Any other questions in the room? Switch back to the in-person folks. Great.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Simon Kinsman from the Canadian Consumer Specialty Products Association. Question for Mary. You had mentioned there's over 1,000 free riders identified. Does RPRA have a sense of the tonnage that is unregistered or underreported? And then how does RPRA adjust its compliance and enforcement based on the kind of the size of the prize?
So potential free riders. Those are 1,000 companies that may be producers. Each one is assessed individually by a compliance support officer as part of our intake process to determine possible size and impact on the program. It's not a perfect system. It is based on judgments, because bringing in one individual free rider is heavily resource intensive. So we want to make sure we are absolutely focusing on the larger companies first. We do that with some very basic research to begin with, so that we're able to say, okay, should this be escalated and be a high priority free rider potential? Again, in terms of tonnage, the only way we're going to know what that tonnage is as we're bringing them into compliance.
Great. And I guess just to follow up, can you speak to the resolution of any of the potential free riders that happened in 2022?
The resolution, sorry.
So how many were brought into compliance and potentially in reference to the total scale of
I think we
programs.
could get that number for you. I don't have it off the top of my head either. But in terms of how many producers were brought in that were required, we can absolutely get that.
Mayor, you brought in some very substantial producers who have substantial tonnage.
Last year, yes, we did. So we don't name names. We don't advertise who they are, but we can absolutely get that number for you if you're interested in it.
Sheila Kerr with the Electronic Product Stewardship Canada. And I had a question. I noticed that you used the term, I think all of you, EPR rather than IPR. And IPR was the differentiator, individual producer responsibility, rather than EPR extended, which normally links to pros. Is there any significance to changing the term?
We've had a debate about that internally. So I'm going to let Mary answer that one. I was leaning towards individual producer responsibility. I think the government's tending towards the extended producer responsibility. The key differentiator for me, getting away from terminology, is that in the legacy programs, there was a monopoly, IFO, industry funding organization. You paid your money and it was all over to them. You paid for it, but you didn't have to worry about it as long as you paid. In the new world, whether it's extended or individual, you pay for it and you're individually responsible for meeting your compliance requirements as a producer. We're probably going to do that by making a contract with a pro. But at the end of the day, under the law, it's you as an individual producer's responsibility to make sure you're meeting all the compliance requirements.
So yeah, we do talk about this a lot, and just a little bit, to give you sort of a brief overview of it. Extended producer responsibility is like IPR is just a type of EPR. Okay, so extended producer responsibility, there's actually definitions established by OECD and United Nations and the EU, and I think CCME, the Canadian Councils for Ministry of Environment, have their own definitions. There's probably more definitions of EPR than there are actually EPR programs. But EPR is really about making the companies who have the commercial connection responsible at the end of life. That is it at a high level. And then there are a whole bunch of types of EPR. Individual producer responsibility is one type. Deposit return program is one type. 50% funding of a municipal program is one type. There are many different types of EPR. Ontario has an individual producer responsibility framework, which Frank's just covered, but there are actually some in there that aren't IPR. Compostable plastics are not IPR. It's a different type of extended producer responsibility because it's just about reporting. So there are different frameworks for EPR. EPR is the blanket term used for all the ones underneath, like deposit return program. So LCBO, that is an EPR program. It's a deposit return program. Make sense?
Okay, so there's no significance to you shifting the name, which is what I was looking for. I have another quick follow-up question if I can. Well, I've got the mic. I noticed that part of your mandate is to interpret regulations. And what role does the ministry play? They wrote the regulation. They are appealable if you don't like the interpretation. You are not appealable if we don't like the interpretation of the reg. So what role does the ministry play in interpreting their own regulations?
You can definitely appeal my decisions. So first, let's talk about that. And we're going to talk about it this afternoon too, how I make statutory decisions, because I am a statutory decision maker. RPRA is, and as registrar appointed under the statute, that is my role. So what I do is I take into consideration the policy intent, and that comes from the ministry. So they tell us what they intended. What they intended may not be what they wrote. I have to read what they wrote as well. I have to get legal advice on what they wrote. I can consider a lot of factors when making a statutory decision, but those statutory decisions are appealable. They are not, I'm not the final say. When I attempt to enforce something against you, you have mechanisms to appeal those decisions. We have 2 appeals right now on our website. So it is not accurate to say my decisions are final and non-appealable. But once the ministry writes the regulation, and we're going to learn again more about this, the ministry, myself, and the Competition Bureau on a panel later this afternoon, They write the regulation and then they're done. They pass it over to RPRA. As part of my decision process on statutory decisions, I understand the policy intent from them, but that is only one component of making a statutory decision.
I said, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and these are new programs, new regulations, and some people are in the inside game like you, Sheila. I've had lots of conversations with people in government and with RPRA, and what does this law mean? But at the end of the day, every law, every regulation is made by the state, by the government, and then there has to be some independent entity, person, could be a judge, could be the Ministry of Environment's compliance program, could be an arm's length agency that has the authority to interpret it. So whatever the government thought it was saying when the drafters, the lawyers that drafted it and went up and cabinet approved or went into the legislature, they wrote some words, and those are public words. It's out of their hands. It's now up to whoever's designated in the law to interpret it. If the government doesn't like the interpretation as well, that's not what we meant, well, they can come in and change it. And there's always an appeal mechanism. And we have the land treatment. I know there's a debate about that. We probably won't get into today. I can just see you. Pardon, sorry? What? Better repeat. Better repeat.
I'll just repeat. I think we're getting into a little side conversation that's better suited for this afternoon. And now I'm sure our digital reporting programs are also curious as to how statutory decision makers work, because you are actually subject to them as well. It's just not me, it's someone else in the government. But we can get into, and we do get into the mechanisms of an appeal and how those work and when it happens. But this isn't new. This isn't some strange framework. Statutory decision makers making interpretations, as Frank's saying, is not new. It's just new to EPR.
Which is a point I made when I spoke. There wasn't a regulator. There's typically not an actual regulator that has power to enforce the laws in EPR. So that's new in Ontario, and it takes a lot of takes time to adapt to that and understand that it is new. But they've brought in a regulatory program that's based on fundamentals like any of the hundreds of other regulatory programs in Ontario and Canada and across the world. State makes the law, regulator interprets and enforces the law.
Thank you. I'm going to switch back to online. So this is a question about our one of our digital reporting services, hazardous waste program. This is a specific question, but I think also maybe speak to maybe RPRA's role in that program a little bit more. So the question is, will RPRA regulate the pricing of full or partial delegation? How can an organization stay compliant without relying on delegation for online manifesting?
So yeah, this is a good opportunity to talk about RPRA's role. So unlike in our extended producer responsibility programs, where we're having conversations about how I'm an independent statutory decision maker, that is not my role under our digital reporting services. My role under the digital reporting services, RPRA's role, my team's role, is to provide service delivery. Service delivery, so HWP and excess soil registrants can come in and provide data that their statutory maker needs, which is the government, not us. So we can only respond in so much as to tell you to speak to the ministry, who is your independent statutory decision maker. We're a vehicle, we're a tool. Unlike EPR, where we're the vehicle, we're the tool, and we're the statutory decision maker.
Just back to Sheila's point. So in the case of the hazardous waste regulation, the regulation or the statute designates certain people, and those people are appointed within the public service. And so you can't go to the minister and say, I don't like what that branch director decided on my program. Minister's going to back away very quickly. Because it's the decision-making is by law made by that person or that group. And we're not it. We're not it.
We can help you find it though. So if you email the team, we can point you in the right direction so you can find the me at the ministry.
Thank you for that clarification. There was a follow-up question asking about, will there be training for online manifesting? And we have ton of resources on our website for the hazardous waste digital reporting service, as well as excess soil. So you can find that there. We also did many webinars that answered questions and went through virtual walkthroughs of the registry. So those are on our website, and we will be hosting more. As we talked about this afternoon, we won't be touching on our digital reporting services, but in the future, it's part of our plan to host more information sessions for that group. So stay tuned. I just want to acknowledge the time. We have 5 minutes left, so we'll have a couple more questions. But in the meantime, before asking those questions, I just wanted to remind everybody and encourage people to submit feedback. So the poll on Zoom should be launching shortly for those of you on the online audience. In person, again, feel free to scan the QR code. There is 2 sides. So one is annual public meeting. The other side is the learning series. So please scan the annual public meeting one and provide some feedback. You don't have to do that right now in terms of completing the survey, but scan it before you leave so you can fill out the survey. We really appreciate feedback all the time, but especially as we're navigating this hybrid world of virtual, online, in person. So it's really helpful to hear from our stakeholders about that. So I'll switch back to questions. This is a question about going back to our producer responsibility programs. So why are producers required to submit supply reports to RPRA when they also provide reports to their pros? And the second part, why does the report need to be validated at the expense of the producer?
So to answer the first question, you need to report to RPRA because we're the ones that are going to tell you what your obligation is. And then you're going to go and enter into a private negotiation with a pro to fulfill that obligation. Do you want the person who is providing you that service and negotiating with you also telling you what your obligation is, which is how much you pay them? You come to RPRA, you tell RPRA your supply data, we're able to tell you your obligation. So you then go and negotiate with a pro to obtain their services. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to tell you how to comply, which is how they get paid. So RPRA is a key process in that, in making sure that you are only paying for the services you require. And yes, we have producers who try to only negotiate with their pro without coming to us, and then we later determine are not producers. So that has happened. So this is a key role we play. Why are our supply data at your expense? Everything is. This is individual producer responsibility. Right now, the producers pay accountably for everything. That is the framework. You are paying to ensure that the data is verified. You are paying for being regulated by us. You are paying to be accountable for your materials. You are paying to make sure collection sites in your system are compliant. All of it is the producer's accountability.
Thanks, Mary. There's a little bit more that's related to it. In terms of fees increasing. RPRA is also increasing producer fees significantly, and pros in all provinces are also increasing their fees since disposal and recycling costs have increased. There has been no transparency to RPRA's rate increases. And maybe Frank, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you. So our fees have gone up over time. Our expenses have gone up. The services we provide have increased. I would disagree that there's no transparency. We've had a lot of feedback. People want to understand what's behind the fees, where are the fees coming from, how are you dividing up between the different programs so there's no cross-subsidization between programs. We've been on a journey for the last few years. I think we made a number of steps to transparency. And we're interested in other things that we can be doing to increase transparency, which is basically helping people understand how we calculated their fees. I think the other part of the question was about the costs going up broadly across programs. And my understanding is that's true. It's not our accountability to manage the overall costs of compliance. Our fees are typically a tiny portion of the fees that almost all producers are paying to their pros, in exchange for the pros providing a service of keeping the producers compliant. Many factors go into those increases. But I think I'll just leave it at that. It's a consequence of the government's decision to move to EPR. And I'll go back to say we're in early days. We're only a few years into this, and over time we'll see how those ultimate costs shake out. And then it's a policy question: is the cost on producers, much of which gets passed down to consumers, worth the benefit to the environment and the economy? That's a big policy question, which I believe the cost will be worth the benefit. But that outcome, it happens over time. It's determined over time.
Thanks, Frank. So we're just at 12 o'clock. There's no more questions online. I'll do one final call in the room for a final pressing question, maybe.
Hi, I'll segue from the point that Frank was just discussing versus Maurice Schneer of Mobius Pro Services. I'm rewinding the tape to one of the slides you showed, Frank, of the pie chart of RPRA's source of funding, where, from memory, it was about 2.1 million was funded from registrant fees, and the balance, about 10 million, was funded from legacy programs. The legacy programs are eventually, that funding source is going to diminish. Does that mean that we'll see a proportionate increase in the fees that will be charged to registrants to fund current and future operating costs for RPRA?
So I think the numbers are actually reduced or reversed. I think it's about $2 million is what we're charging out to the legacy industry funding organizations. And that will continue to reduce, and it'll reduce to zero. So between some of the same people work on both sides, the new world and the old world. Eventually the old world costs go to zero, and everything we pay for, we paid for in the new world. I don't think you're going to see a one-to-one. Every dollar that the fees reduce is going to be a dollar more on the producer side. But at the end of the day, in a few years, maybe in 2026, when the Bluebacks finally transitions and Stewardship Ontario basically winds down, turns the lights off, that'll be at zero, and the fees will all come from EPR and, of course, the digital reporting services.
Okay, thank you for correcting me on the difference between what was legacy and what was current. Thanks.
Okay. I think we'll have to wrap it up there. We don't want to keep people waiting, and people might be hungry or need to head out. So do you need the next slide? I just want to say thank you to everybody today. This has been a great, engaging event, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all your questions, but such is life. We will do our best to follow up with some of those specific questions, like I mentioned earlier. If you have questions coming out of this meeting, there's two email addresses on the slide there. Yes, one for communications, if you have some general questions about the event or any feedback or comments, and then also the registry. So that's directly to our compliance team, Mary's team, and they are the best people to go to with any questions about whether they be your compliance needs or your digital reporting needs. This is being recorded and live streamed, so we will be posting the video and recording to our website by early next week. So if you feel like tuning in again, you can watch it there.